Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Tribal museums have been through the ringer this year, juggling financial uncertainty. After legal challenges, the Trump administration just restored all the grants to libraries and museums that were eliminated earlier this year. But it was too late for some of those institutions, especially in rural areas, that had to go without funding for months. We'll find out how tribal museums are faring after a tumultuous year and their outlook for the future. That's right after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. More than 60 Indigenous artifacts have been returned to Canada from the Vatican. As Dan Karpinchuk reports, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leaders were on hand at Montreal's airport over the weekend to welcome them back.
There were 62 items in large crates on board the plane that landed on Saturday morning. Many Native leaders, as well as those involved in the repatriation efforts, were on hand. Some bowed as the crates were lowered onto the tarmac. For most, the objects on board were more than simply artifacts. One of those present was the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak.
This is an important and emotional moment for many First Nations across this country. I hope it will also be an important moment for all Canadians to consider the history and the future of this country. Reconciliation isn't one stop here. Reconciliation is every single day doing this work.
Indigenous leaders in Canada have been calling for years on the Vatican to repatriate the artifacts in its collection. They met with Pope Francis in Rome in 2022 to talk about the legacy of the residential schools. At the time, they were also given a private viewing of some of the objects held by the church. They included embroidered gloves, a kayak, and a sling for carrying a baby. Some Indigenous leaders say it's not about bringing home objects or artifacts, but about bringing home memories, bringing home the dignity and power that was taken from their ancestors. The artifacts will not be available for public viewing until sometime early next year. Nepenak also says there are more artifacts in the Vatican Museum, so the work to repatriate them will continue. For National Native News, I'm Dan Karpinchuk.
After finally being sworn in following a historic 7-week delay, Arizona Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva is using her first legislative act to fulfill a campaign promise she made to tribes across Indian country. KJZZ's Gabriel Pietrazio has more.
In 2015, her father, the late Raul Grijalva, first introduced the Save Oak Flat from Foreign Mining Act to protect an Apache holy site east of Phoenix by stopping a congressionally approved land exchange between the U.S. Forest Service and Resolution Copper.
So maybe the foreign company has millions and billions of dollars. We have a spirit.
A decade later, the fight isn't over. The controversial land swap has been put on hold until as early as next year, and the new Congresswoman is taking on that mantle by reintroducing her dad's old bill.
The bar is very high. Again, this is new to me. Not new to the family, but new to me. I mean, I hear it even from Democrats. Mining is super important, right, but none of the ore is staying here. It's all going to China.
As for Resolution Copper, the company tells KJZZ, Grijalva has been invited to meet their workforce to talk about what they call her highly concerning bill, which they say threatens hundreds of jobs today and billions of dollars for Arizona's future. For National Native News, I'm Gabriel Pietrazio.
The Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma is concluding its emergency food assistance response this month. The tribe issued a declaration of emergency in October after the federal government announced the suspension of SNAP benefits for recipients in November. The declaration tapped millions of dollars in the tribe's reserve funds for cash assistance for Cherokee citizens and support for food pantries, meal sites, and food banks. According to the Cherokee Nation, the tribe delivered nearly $2 million in assistance to individuals and nonprofits. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com. The Indian Arts and Crafts Board promotes Indian artists of federally recognized tribes through its online source directory. Information on this no-charge opportunity available at doi.gov/IACB, who support this program.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. Over 1,000 federal grants to libraries and museums that were canceled earlier this year were just reinstated. The move by the Trump administration comes after a federal court decision that determined eliminating the grants was illegal. It's a sigh of relief for the cultural institutions that rely on that money for programs and research. That includes dozens of museums that work to present the unique cultural and historical perspective of their tribes. This is the fourth year that there is a day set aside to recognize tribal museums, and we are checking in with a selection of them today to get their outlook on the work they do. You can join our discussion as well. Give us a call at 1-800-996-2848. Is there a tribal museum in your community, or perhaps one that you'd like to visit? Call us. Let us know. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us now from San Diego, California is Cece Hovey. She's the Public Affairs and Communications Director for the Association on American Indian Affairs. She's also a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. Cece, good morning, and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having the association back on your program, Sean.
Great to have you, Cece. Joining us from Nia Bay, Washington is Janine Ledford. She is the Executive Director of the Makah Museum, which is housed by the Makah Cultural and Research Center, and Janine is, of course, Makah. Janine, you've been on the show as well. Good morning and welcome back.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this hour.
We are too. Thank you, Janine. Joining us from Palmer, Alaska is Selena Ortega Chalero. She is the museum specialist for the Chickaloon Village Traditional Council's Culture and Historic Preservation Department. She is Tarahumara. Selena, good morning and welcome back to Native America Calling.
Good to be here.
Great to have you. And our fourth guest joins us from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Stacy Larrivee. She is the Indigenization Director for the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. She's Ponca. Stacy, you've been on the show as well. Welcome back to Native America Calling.
Tatia, I'm happy to be here.
It's great to have all of you on the show. All of you are returning guests, so that's always nice. You know how our show works. And I do want to provide a note of disclosure that the Association on American Indian Affairs is an underwriter for Native America Calling. Their sponsorship is not related, though, to the editorial decision to include them in the show today. And with that, Cece, I'd like to begin with you because the Institute for Museum and Library Services, IMLS, just restored all the federal grants that the administration had canceled earlier this year. What does this mean for tribal museums?
Well, we hope it means that the taps are going to be turned back on soon, but we know that those, it isn't as simple necessarily as turning a tap back on. It's not like a check gets cut, that night or anything like that. So we're hopefully, slowly coming back online.
You say it's not like a check just gets cut immediately and there's money in the bank. Give us a rough time frame for how this all works and when these museums can expect to receive that funding.
I honestly think it's different for each institution, because again, there's staff that needs to come into IMLS and get caught up on months of work and all of that sort of stuff. So it's really difficult to if I say 4 weeks and somebody gets their funding in 6 weeks, I don't want to be inaccurate in any way, but it's kind of different for each museum. And that just kind of speaks more to the diversity of tribal museums as well.
I understand. Well, let's talk with Janine Ledford at the Macomb Museum. Janine, the restoration of IMLS funding, what does it mean for you folks?
Well, it means we can continue with the work that we proposed. These are competitive proposals for the most part, the enhancement ones, and then the tribal museum ones, or enhancement is the library side of IMLS. And I'm looking for the date. We actually, I believe, we may have been reinstated earlier than just recently because we wrote an appeal. I think we got a notice through AAM, Association of American Museums. They sort of guided us to, the process of writing an appeal, and we submitted an appeal. Sonderling was the new director who, gutted all the IMLS programs. We got these notices to terminate back in, April, or when I believe it was in April, and then we submitted an appeal. And then right after that, the states actually did a big court, took IMLS to court and won. And then we were notified probably back in May that our grant was reinstated. It might have been because we submitted an appeal within that time frame. So I'm looking for that documentation now, and I will quit looking for it. But it means, back to your question, it means we can keep doing the work that we decided to do or declared to do in our proposals that was carefully reviewed and approved back in 2024. That was part of the problem, is we had been the 2024 Congress awarded those funds. We started the project, and then in 2025, they said, your project is terminated. So we had already spent money that we couldn't get reimbursed for that time period, which of course is unfortunate and really, not according to our contractual agreement.
But it sounds like now going forward, you will ultimately get that reimbursement at some point in the future.
Oh yes, we have already. We have.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
In fact, we contributed. We were even on a NBC News program talking about the problems with IMLS back in May.
Mm-hmm. Well, it just seems like there must be so much uncertainty on an institution like yours. And aside just from the finances, how does it impact you folks in terms of just emotionally and just your confidence coming to your job every day and thinking whether or not you'll be able to provide the services that you're supposed to provide?
Any of us can jump in?
Yeah, Janine, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it really, it's very unfortunate. In fact, the first draft of our letter of appeal, I wrote some kind of, maybe just a little more use a little more charged language. Like, unfortunately, as American Indians, we are used to, we are familiar with government breaches of contract. We hoped in this day and age we wouldn't be experiencing that. So it kind of takes the wind out of your sails, thinking we should have advanced beyond this. Promises and signed, should be kept. Signed documents should be honored, or contracts should be honored. So it's unfortunate because some small tribal museums like ours don't have a great big, tax base like you might see in cities or states for funding to do the really important work that our community, kind of has asked us to do. So it's been discouraging, but like I said, we were quick to respond.
Thank you, Janine. Selena, how about you? Now, the Chickaloon Village does not have a brick and mortar museum presently, but what does this restoration of IMLS funding mean for current and future museum work?
Well, although we don't have a brick and mortar facility, we do still do a lot of everything else that a cultural facility does. We do a lot of programming. We do a lot of community outreach. I think, fortunately, our museum operations did not have an IMLS grant, although we were just awarded one of the new ones. But we did have an IMLS grant that was indirectly supporting programming for our Elders Lunch program. And we're extremely fortunate to have some amazing foundations in the state of Alaska. And one of the local regional ones, the Matsu Health Foundation, came in and were amazing in providing that additional support. But we had to use some reserve funding that we often have set aside for emergency situations or for families that come into emergency situations. And so some of that funding had to be used. And a lot of that funding goes normally towards our health and social services. So it means when you redirect funding to one thing, you're taking it away from something else that is much needed. So having IMLS restored means now those funds can come back to where they originally were primarily dedicated to. But yeah, I think as all of my colleagues here on this call, I think we're all just trying to navigate what's ahead, because even though IMLS is restored, there's still the National Endowment for Humanities that was not, that is still kind of at risk. And we don't even know how much IMLS is going to be awarded this year, because that still hasn't been determined. So I think right now it's just still, baby steps.
And Selena, the federal funding cuts, did they impact the plans that you have for the construction of a museum?
Yes. So we participated in the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums Culture Builds Community cohort 2 years ago. And we went through all of the initial things that you go through to establish a museum. We did a lot of community consultations, surveys. We actually have a vision and a mission for our culture facility. We have a space allocation diagram. Everything's set. We were supposed to go into master planning, and we had already started conversations with several funders that were interested in supporting us, but now that's been put on pause. We're still basically we're ready to go. We just need to get funding to do that. So in the meantime, we've kind of redirected some of our work to make sure that we're still moving forward, and we've kind of switched over to doing more digital initiatives. So focused right now on our digital database that we've been building, and also repatriation consultations. But it's definitely still on our plan. It's going to happen. It just means it's going to happen a little later, unfortunately.
Federal grants to libraries and museums that were canceled earlier this year were just reinstated. That's the focus of our show today, and other topics as well with regard for tribal museums. And listeners, you are more than welcome to join us today. Share your thoughts, share your insights, or maybe ask a question if you are curious and learning more about tribal museums, or perhaps there's a tribal museum in your community that you'd like to talk about. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Give us a call. Crow leaders are looking to dramatically change their criteria for tribal enrollments. The change would consider all current members as having 100% Crow blood. The tribe is among a handful of others that are revamping their blood quantum requirements in order to grow their citizenship. We'll hear about it from tribal leaders in different parts of the country on the next Native America Calling.
The Indian Arts and Crafts Act protects authentic American Indian and Alaska Native artists and craftspeople and their art and craftwork. Under the Act, it is illegal to market art or craftwork misrepresented as American Indian, Indian, Native American, or Alaska Native made, or as the product of a particular Indian tribe. Reporting potential Act violations can be done at doi.gov/IACB or at 1-888-ART-FAKE. Support provided by Indian Arts and Crafts Board.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. We are continuing our conversation now about tribal museums. We're getting a status check following the 4th Annual Tribal Museums Day, and you can join this conversation by calling 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE, or you can leave a comment on our social media pages, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, or you can visit our website, nativeamericacalling.com. Cece Hovey is the Public Affairs and Communications Director for the Association on American Indian Affairs. And Cece, listening to other guests, and even with this funding restoration, there is still uncertainty when it comes to museums and other cultural institutions. What do tribal museums have to do right now to be ready for what might lie ahead?
Oh, that's a big question. Well, tribal museums are like other museums. They're critically underfunded and critically understaffed. And so when things like, federal shutdowns or agency instability or delayed grants or staff reductions happen, they create some major disruptions. And so, in a space where they're already being challenged, to continue to pile on to that is crazy. And so they are continuing to just put one foot in front of the other to survive. And just, surviving is important. And we know that, right? And so my advice to, tribal museums across the country is, we see you, and, the association sees you, and we're doing everything we can to help uplift you and to support you. In every tribal museums need something different. At the beginning, I did say, all this funding is kind of dependent upon the diversity of the tribal museums, and then we heard from them about how the funding has affected them, and it's different across the board. So it's difficult to say specifically, one thing.
Mm-hmm. Cece, why is it, in your view, is it that tribal museums and other museums as well don't get adequate funding? What do you think is behind that?
Well, at the top of your program in the news cycle, we heard about SNAP benefits, right? And so there's so many other priorities right now that are feeding people comes first. We know that. And so there are a lot of other issues that are super pressing in terms of just survival. And so tribal museums and cultural centers across the country and the world kind of have to take a back seat to that. But, tribal museums are always there to come back to as the places where our culture is, our diverse cultures are being held and cared for while these other things are happening.
And that's what makes the fourth year celebrating tribal museums so exciting. Cece, what do tribal museums offer that other institutions don't? As Native people, I think we're pretty dialed into the uniqueness of what we might be able to offer to our own museums. But for somebody listening to the show who is not Native, who maybe has never been to a tribal museum, what do they need to understand?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, tribal museums are the truest expressions of sovereignty. They're places where Native nations educate people about their histories, uphold the cultural authority, and connect the next generations to the land, identity, and truth. And these institutions correct decades of misinformation created by non-Native museums. And they offer a grounded, accurate understanding of who we are as diverse Native peoples. They strengthen our local tribal economies by supporting Native artists, promoting cultural tourism, and creating those spaces where community learning kind of thrives. And like you said, this year has been really challenging, but I would say tribal museums continue to show the same resilience and innovation that they've always shown. So just this year, so we have some stats here. The association tracks tribal museums across the country in the last 2 years, kind of show both that growth and strain. In 2024, we had identified about 132 tribal museums nationwide. In this year, our research shows that 9 of those institutions are currently closed until further notice. And we don't have a full picture of why that closure occurred, but we do know that several tribal museums have faced natural disasters in the last year. Like floods, fires, storms, and those kinds of events have become more frequent as climate changes and all of that. But we have seen growth too. So in 2025, we have 148 tribal museums that are now in operation. So it means about roughly a quarter of all federally recognized tribes have a museum or a cultural center. So despite all of these challenges, tribal museums continue to show, remarkable resilience and resolve.
Yeah, that's huge. Even with 9 institutions closed, there's 16 more than there were last year in the aggregate.
Yeah.
That's great news. Cece, I also wanted to ask you about the other work your organization does with regard to repatriating important cultural items. And can you tell us what the current environment is for getting institutions to comply with NAGPRA?
Well, I can tell you within the context of tribal museums, so, what we're finding through the association's research over the last few years is that the people that are the directors of the tribal museums or, that work in the tribal museums and run the tribal museums are also at the same time trying to do this repatriation work. And so they're, one person and they're wearing many, many hats. And that, again, speaks to them being critically understaffed. So tribal museums are carrying all of that. So they're trying to get our ancestors and our sacred belongings back through repatriation, and they're trying to repair erased narratives shaped by those outside institutions. They're also teaching languages. They're teaching land-based knowledge. They're providing youth education. They're sustaining artist economies through their gift shops and cultural programming. So, they're doing so much with so few people. And so I just want to, call that forward also. So they are trying to repatriate while also running a museum, and that can be very, very challenging.
In the enforcement of laws with regard to NAGPRA that are currently on the books, is the federal government assisting with that right now?
You know what? I don't have a lot of experience within that space, but maybe some of the museums that are on the call have that experience. I would love to hear from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Janine Ledford, what's your thought with regard to the federal government working to enforce the NAGPRA laws currently on the books?
That's a good question, and I know we actually collaborated with NASPO, with the National Association for Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, years ago to look at the compliance from NAGPRA, from the Native American Graves Protection Act of, I believe, 1990. And we did find that there were a lot of museums and universities that were falling short of the requirements to provide tribes with inventories, with information on what they were holding in their collections. But I know things have actually come a long way. And regarding federal assistance, I don't know how to speak directly to that. But what I've really seen over the last even decade or a little bit more is quite a shift in thinking on behalf of larger museums and their administration and their policymakers. Because, so for example, the Smithsonian museums are all charged, I believe, with developing ethical return policies and procedures. And so even outside of NAGPRA, if they can't prove that something was ethically acquired, tribes can make a claim for it. And so they're reaching to us and saying, should we research these these collection practices together? Can we help you get information on how these were removed from your communities? And so it used to be that they, kind of had the attitude that, let's make sure that, that we maintain these collections as they are. We know how to care for them better than any other organization. But, even the non-federal museums, we were in Colorado a little more than a year ago, and we were doing some research on the Northwest collections. They had a project that was actually put together by them, and they started talking about ethical returns. And, you didn't hear that you didn't hear that before. You really heard, if you'd like to put in for a loan or, so it seems, I'm encouraged by that. And I don't know that that's widespread, that every museum across the United States has actually has that improved attitude. But I'm encouraged from the ones that we've been working with, and how the feds there's a program, or there was a program through the National Park Service where tribes could apply for some funding to do research and actually to do repatriations. I can't speak to that on what is happening with that right now, or even in the last few years. But so there was some support, but I don't know exactly how that is functioning right now. Yeah, but I can speak just again real briefly to the importance of these associations. Like we have our Association of American Indian Affairs, our National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, or the AAM, American Association of Museums, which really works so much better with tribal museum professionals anymore. Like I said, they're the ones who got us information on appealing that termination of one of our IMLS awards, and we submitted that, and within weeks we were reinstated. So I think other tribal projects weren't reinstated until fairly recently, but they got the word out. We followed the instructions, submitted something, and so those associations who can look at policy at the national level and kind of provide guidance, because like Cece was saying, we're on the ground here doing the work, and it's hard to pay attention to everything and comment on every new policy that's that's been drafted. So we just really appreciate how these associations work on our behalf and get us information that we might not otherwise have.
Thank you, Janine. 1-800-99-NATIVE. If you'd like to join this conversation today, if you have some thoughts perhaps on NAGPRA repatriation efforts, or you'd just like to talk a little bit more about celebrating tribal museums, you can do that. Give us a call, 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's bring Stacy Larrivee into the conversation now with the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, because, Stacy, we've been talking about these roles that tribal museums play with regard to repatriation. Can you talk about the relationship between museums and tribes for protecting and advocating historic and cultural belongings?
Yeah, so I can actually speak on THPOs, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, and their role in it. But for clarity, TIPOs that receive funding from the Historic Preservation Fund, HPF, that's administered by the National Park Service in a form of a grant. They cannot use it for museum work or even NAGPRA work, even though tribal nations may delegate their TIPO to do museum work. That funding must come from another resource for any work outside the NPS TIPO framework. So whether that's another grant or from the tribal government itself, unfortunately, most of the grants are competitive for museum work. That's one of the things that people who are in the museum work are up against. But TIPOs, I mean, if they are doing the museum work, they're doing things just like everyone else in the museum field. Education and language for the people, curation, cultural landscapes, archives, ancestral protections, repatriation and rematriations, such as NAGPRA, and collections and care.
Stacy, what's the current environment for that work from your standpoint?
Just like everyone else in tribal museums, it's right now, there's uncertainty, but just like my colleagues mentioned, it's amazing to see the resiliency of what tribal people can do with limited funds. So right now, there's just a lot of uncertainty, but I'm glad that we're all here and we work together, and that's what's needed right now.
Absolutely. Who funds the work that you do, and what does the future funding scenario look like?
For TIPOs or
yeah.
for? Okay.
Yeah, for TIPOs.
Okay, so right now, the funding for THPOs come from the HPF Historic Preservation Fund. That's administered from the National Park Service, which falls under the Interior Department. So that's for THPOs. and their duties and functions. Separately, from conversations with many other TIPOs who do museum work, it's usually through grants, collaborations with different other organizations, or even some federal entities for different types of language programs and what have you.
Got it. And then your organization, the Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, where does the bulk of your funding come from?
Those come from grants, usually. Majority of our funding comes from many different grants, and just like any other organization as well.
All right. Thank you, Stacy Larrivee, Indigenization Director for the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers. She's speaking with us from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And we have the phone lines open right now for anyone who would like to join this conversation. Maybe you are sitting in a tribal museum or standing in a tribal museum at this very moment, looking at a display or having lunch or having a conversation. Maybe you're at a workshop and you're learning about important historical events in your tribal history, and it's all made possible by a library or museum. Give us a call. We'd really like to hear the impact of the tribal museum in your community. Just pick up that phone, call 1-800-996-2848. 1-800-996-2848. This is the fourth year celebrating tribal museums, and that's what we're doing today on Native America Calling, and it always makes it more fun and more rewarding when listeners join the conversation. 1-800-99-NATIVE. If you don't feel like picking up that phone, if you really don't feel comfortable, you can always go to our social media as well. You can check us out on Facebook. You can go to Instagram. You can go to our website, nativeamericacalling.com. But I really hope somebody calls. I really hope a few of you call. 1-800-996-2848. We've got the phone lines open. Our producers in Albuquerque, New Mexico are standing by waiting for you to call. So what are you waiting for? Pick up the phone. Call 1-800-996-2848.
Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions.
Kaufman & Associates is a Native-owned and led consulting firm, supporting Native communities with culturally grounded solutions to shape Indigenous futures. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
You're listening to Native America Calling. Plenty of time yet to join today's conversation about tribal museums. Tell us, how important is the museum in your tribal community? 1-800-996-2848. That number is also 1-800-99-NATIVE. One of our guests today, Selena Ortego-Chalero, is the museum specialist for the Chickaloon Village Traditional Council's Culture and Historic Preservation Department. She's speaking with us from Palmer, Alaska. And Selena, the last time you came on our show, you talked about digital archiving, and I'm curious to know, where does that fit in with what you and other tribal museums are doing right now?
Well, I think all of us, as I think CC kind of mentioned previously, a lot of tribes that are doing museum and archival work, we're all dynamically different, and I think all of us have selected certain focuses to be our primary targets of what we want to accomplish in the work. But for Chickaloon specifically, our digital archives reflect a lot of the repatriation work we're doing. So right now, our tribe is currently we're in consultation with 16 organizations throughout the country doing repatriation consultations. But in addition to that, we have been for almost the last decade, been doing research to identify where Otna materials are housed that were removed from our community. And so what we do through our digital database is we've been getting digital surrogates of those materials to bring back home. And then we put them on our database. We do regular community consultations with the other Ahtna tribes in the state of Alaska to not only share the materials that we're bringing back, but also to further contextualize them, because a lot of these materials that are housed at external institutions, they either have no information attached to them, so no metadata that's reflected in their digital records, or they're either misidentified. And so what we're trying to do is to correct that narrative, but also to personalize it, to make people aware that these materials oftentimes are living things that still have a life, that still contribute to cultural lifeways within communities. So that's what we've been doing most recently, and also recontextualizing them, because a lot of them are kind of partner pieces to materials within our own collections. An example would be, most recently, we have a collection of historical photographs, and they have images of several notable Ahtna chiefs from the 19th century. And we found that there was an anthropologist who did a lot of research in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska, and so she was documenting a lot of cultural knowledge in that research. So we found her field notes were actually housed at the National Archives and Records Administration in Washington, D.C. So we were able to get digital surrogates of her records, but she actually recorded all of her interviews, and those recordings are housed at the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. And so we've been able to now have on our database images of these tribal chiefs, notes of the conversations that were had with the tribal chiefs, but then also their recorded voices. And it's all in our digital database. And this is something that a lot of these non-native institutions and their digital records don't reflect. And so we're able to now present it to the public and to our community in a way that they can fully understand and appreciate all of that context.
That's fascinating, Selena. It really is. And just seems so complex to have these different archives that you're dealing with. Where does the funding for all this work come from?
That is definitely a great question. So we get multiple sources of funding. Sometimes it's been through IMLS. Most recently, we did have a National Endowments of the Humanities grant, which we were able to use a majority of that award to create the digital infrastructure for our digital database. Unfortunately, like IMLS, our NEH award was terminated 6 months early. Because of that, we were able to get a local foundation to kind of provide bridge funding to support the remainder of the work, but we were supposed to originally have our database redesigned to personalize the site by hiring a consultant to do the web design work. That has not happened because we're currently in contention with NEH to try to get the remaining of the funding that was promised before the grant was terminated reimbursed to us, but it hasn't happened yet. But in the meantime, we get funding through the Bureau, BIA, through other foundations, and then also sometimes we do a lot of consultation and collaboration. So we have contracts with local, state, and federal agencies. So that's also a revenue source that supports the Culture and Historic Preservation Department.
Mentioning the fact that you're still working to get some of this NEH award money back to your organization, does that lead you to believe at all that there's a future without federal funding for institutions like yours?
I would love to think that there is a future without federal funding. As some of my colleagues have already mentioned, we're still, when you rely on federal funding, to some degree, it still promises that we're meant to get money. The way the federal grants work, most of them, they're on a reimbursement basis. So that means that the tribe has to front the money up front, and then your accounting department has to go in and put in to pull the funding from your award to get reimbursed. But as we have seen this year alone, a lot of those last reimbursements for the early terminated grants have actually not been reimbursed yet. So an example would be for us, our NEH grant that I previously mentioned. We got the way IMLS and NEH work, they have their online platforms where tribes have to go in and you get to see the messages between your program officer and then also any kind of messages or communications. And usually we get formal letters also sent to whoever is the program lead. When the termination happened for NEH and IMLS, some tribes did not get an actual formal letter saying our awards were terminated. Some of us just got a message in that platform saying our grants were terminated and the end, like as of today, your grant has been terminated kind of thing. Well, for us, because we didn't get a formal letter, we got a communication that our grant was terminated on we got notification April 30th. It didn't actually give us an end date, so we interpreted that as our grant was terminated on April 30th. So all of our final reimbursements, our accounting department put through expenses that were incurred up to April 30th. Well, when we got a final communication from NEH at the end of the summer saying that, oh, no, your grant was terminated at the beginning of April, so we're not going to reimburse those funds.
Okay.
So now we're in like this back and forth with them. And we're not the only tribe that experienced that. There's quite a few that also. And it was just because DOJ came in and did a lot of cuts, didn't go through the process. And so they technically violated the award agreement that we sign every time you're awarded a grant through IMLS or NEH.
Selena, this reimbursement process that you're talking about with these federal grants, how is it different when you get money from private foundations in those grants? Is it a reimbursement or you just get a check and you can put that to work right away?
Well, it depends on the foundation, but just another example. I love giving examples.
Sure.
We just got awarded a community archives grant through the Mellon Foundation. I got my award notification at September 1st. We actually got the full award amount late last month. So no reimbursements. And it's for a 2-year grant.
All right. And that's that's a lot easier for you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and it also shows, I think, good faith and from the foundation itself, they believe in the project that was awarded. They believe in our tribe, our community to do the work. So yes, we still have to do regular reporting like we would with a federal grant, but the money's there. It means that we don't have to worry about any early termination or worry about maybe if the foundation were to lose the funding. It's there. It's with the tribe.
Wonderful. Let's go to the phones. We have Strider, who is listening in Southwest Arizona on station KGLP. Good morning, Strider. You are on the air.
Yes, good morning. I would just like to make a comment about the positive impression that 3 different tribal museums have made on me over the many years. First would be the Museum of the Plains Indian up in Browning, Montana on the Blackfeet Reservation. The second would be the Tohono O'odham Tribal Museum south of Sells, Arizona on the TO Res. And then the Navajo Nation Museum in Window Rock, Arizona. And I think that they are definitely excellent sources for educating both the public and the tribal members.
Strider, thank you for calling in. I've been to 2 of those museums. I've been to the TO Museum. I've been to the Navajo Nation Museum. I've driven by. Walked right by the Museum of the Plains in Browning. It's never been open whenever I've been there. It's always closed.
Oh, wow.
So,
yeah.
But that's wonderful. You've been to all these museums. Awesome. Thank you so much for calling the show. Really appreciate it.
Okay. You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Selena, this is a great segue into my next question because Strider, he's talking about bricks and mortar museums and obviously, creating one, building one, that's an expensive project. It's a major undertaking. Why is that important for the Chickaloon Village Traditional Council?
Well, right now, pretty much at the heart of everything that Chickaloon does is our tribal school. So we're very fortunate to have the only Otna school in the state of Alaska. And we're actually only one of a handful of tribal schools in the state of Alaska. And because of that, it's served as our community hub. So it's where we have elder gatherings sometimes. It's where we do sometimes cultural celebrations. But it would be so much better and more inviting if we had a larger space where we could gather and celebrate. And not only that, right now, our tribal school, they use a traditional physical response curriculum, meaning that all of their curriculum focuses on the Ahtna seasonal calendar throughout the year. And with that, they practice cultural lifeways throughout the year in some of their lessons. So they're out there processing moose hide, processing salmon, they're creating clothing and regalia. But sometimes, especially with any of anything related to food, we have to set up these pop-up tents outside. And Alaska winters and fall can be very difficult. If we had a culture facility, which was our intent, we would have workshop spaces where the kids could come over and do that work. And they wouldn't have to worry about setting up pop-up tents. And then they could actually look at the materials and the collections that were made by their ancestors and how they were used, and we could pull things out and they can interact with them and they can learn from them. They can learn the stitch work. They can see the beadwork. So for us, it's really about bringing everything back together and creating one place where we can gather and celebrate together, and also invite the community in, the non-Native community in our region, so they can actually start to see a more correct narrative about the history and culture of our people. Because right now, up until recently, a lot of the public was getting the stories from secondhand voices that were from outside the community. So they weren't always accurate. They weren't always truthful. They always had a context of in the past and not in the present. And so we're really hoping that through our culture facility, a lot of the work that we've been doing with our cultural partners to kind of correct those narratives can be done a little bit better, and it'll be in our community, not outside. People can actually come and visit us.
And Selena, what's also really exciting is even without an actual building, there's still a museum exhibit that you helped curate. Tell us about that as we begin to wind down the show.
Yeah, so we created Tsutsatne, honoring our ancestors, which actually, for those of you who are listening to this radio show, if you cannot come to Alaska to see it, if you go on to www.chickaloon, CHICKALOON.org, you can actually see the virtual version of the exhibit. It was years in the making. We did a lot of community interviews. We researched cultural materials housed in not only our collections, but in several archives from around the country. We actually have a few of our digitally repatriated items that are reflected in that exhibit, but it was really about creating kind of a calling card for the community. The exhibit details the history and the culture of Chickaloon Native Village, a federally recognized Ahtna Dene tribe here in South Central Alaska, but it was all with the intent of it being from community voice. So yes, I curated it, but I am technically an outsider, even though I am Indigenous myself. So it was really important to make sure that all of our sources that were creating the narrative for that exhibit was coming from Ahtna voice. And so we did that a lot through the interviews, which you can see on the virtual version, as well as the documents and the photographs that we were able to use. And it's currently on display at the Palmer Museum of History and Art in downtown Palmer, and then it will next be at the Wasilla Museum and Visitor Center in Wasilla, Alaska, starting February 3rd, 2026.
All right, and with that, we are out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up this conversation today on Native America Calling. Big thanks to our four guests who joined the conversation today: Selena Ortega Chalero, Stacy Larrivee, Janine Ledford, and Cece Hovey. And like I said earlier, you can always continue this conversation, this dialogue on our social media platforms. So please visit our Facebook page, Instagram, go to Blue Sky, go to Threads, or check out our website, nativeamericacalling.com. Post, like, comment. Tell us what you enjoyed about today's show. And don't forget to join us again tomorrow for a look at tribes who are reassessing how they determine citizenship, including changing their blood quantum requirements. I'm Sean Spruce. Enjoy the rest of your day.
The Association on American Indian Affairs invites all to Tribal Museums Day, December 6th through December 12th. Tribal museums may offer no-cost or reduced admission, art markets, and live cultural demonstrations. Tribal Museums Day honors diverse Native nations as the experts of their own cultures. You can find a map of tribal museums and more at indian-affairs.org/Tribal Museums Day. The association supports this show. Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiver-resources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.